the Giants Causeway, at the top of Northern Ireland, is in actual fact a naturally formed volcanic formation. Though this video is not about the science behind this beautiful stone structure, but of course about the legend and folklore associated with it, which makes, I'm sure you'll agree, for a much more interesting tale. Long ago in ancient Ireland, when the land was ruled by magic and giants, there was one giant who was one of Ireland's most greatest and most well-remembered heroes, Fionn McCool, the leader of the great band of warriors known as the Féile. He was the man who first tasted the flesh of the legendary Salmon of Knowledge, which made him the wisest man alive to add to his already great strength and bravery. And of course, he was also the father of another Irish hero, Oisin, who's most famous for being the one who travelled to the mystical land of Tír na nÓg. Both of those stories I have told in previous videos, but in this video's tale of ancient wonder, we go far north on the island of Ireland, to the wondrous Giants Causeway. It is said that at this time there was also a giant in Scotland whose name was Benandonner, and like Fionn, Benandonner enjoyed a good fight. And when tales of Fionn's exploits in Ireland made their way across the seas, from Ireland to Benandonner's ears in Scotland, Benandonner gloated that while this Fionn sounded strong, oh, he was sure that should the two ever meet, Fionn would fall by his hand. However, Benandonner had a problem, for he was unable to get to Ireland. He could not swim, and was far too large to fit in any boat available. He was a giant, remember? Fionn, never one to back down from a challenge, decided to find a way to make it possible for Benandonner to come to Ireland, and he began work on building a bridge, or causeway, from the north coast of Ulster, across the Irish Sea to Scotland, so that Benandonner might come to him. He used great big stone columns of 6 sides or more, and fitted them together like a honeycomb structure, all the way across the sea, building his causeway. When it was finally complete, Fionn was exhausted from his labours, and it was then that he first laid eyes on Benandonner, far in the distance on the horizon. Fionn then realised that Benandonner was actually much larger than himself, and much larger than he'd ever imagined. Fionn thought perhaps he'd gotten himself in a little over his head this time. But he wasn't about to throw in the towel just yet. He quickly returned home and told his wife Oona, and the two of them came up with a great plan to scare Benandonner back to Scotland. After the Scottish giant made his way across the causeway to Ireland, he found his way to Fionn's home. There he was greeted by Oona, who apologised that Fionn was currently away gathering firewood, but that he was looking forward to their fight, and insisted that Benandonner, if he should arrive before Fionn returned, that Benandonner wait for him. Benandonner agreed to wait, and Oona invited him inside so that he might rest after his long journey. She told him that Fionn wanted to be sure that both men were at their best for the fight. Inside, Oona then offered the Scot some bread, which he gladly accepted. What he didn't know, however, was that Oona had baked in lots of stones inside this bread. She handed him some, saying that this was Fionn's favourite, which he eats every day. The Scot bit into the bread and chewed, breaking his teeth as he did, not realising the stones inside, and he didn't want to seem rude to his host, so he reluctantly finished off his portion, but wondered, what kind of man could this Fionn be if he eats this kind of bread every day? Oona then tore off another piece of the bread, but this part she knew had no stones in it, and began to eat it herself. Benandonner was shocked to see this lady eating so easily what he thought was the same bread that broke his teeth. She then stopped and stood up and said that she'd forgotten to feed the baby. She went into the next room and invited Benandonner in to see the child. As Benandonner entered the room, he saw the largest crib and inside it the biggest baby he had ever seen. Oona then handed the remainder of her bread to the baby, who quickly took it and began to eat it with ease. However, at this stage, Benandonner was less concerned with the bread, as he began to wonder, if this is the size of Fionn's baby, how big could Fionn himself be? Little did the Scottish giant realise that the baby before him was actually Fionn in disguise. It was now the Scot who was having second thoughts about the fight. He quickly thanked Oona for her hospitality, but said that he'd waited long enough for Fionn, and that he must return to Scotland now before the high tide comes in and covers the causeway. Off he ran back to the causeway that Fionn had made, and back towards his own land. As he crossed the causeway, he began to tear up the stones, tossing them aside down into the deep sea, destroying the causeway as he went, so that Fionn would not be able to follow him back to Scotland. All that was left were small remains on each coastline, the most famous of which is of course the Giants Causeway in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. Some stories also tell that as Benandonner was making his way back to Scotland, in order to try and scare him just a little further, Fionn reached into the ground of Ulster and ripped up a large chunk of the land and tried to throw it at his fleeing Scottish rival. His throw, however, missed, and this large piece of earth landed in the Irish Sea. It is said that where Fionn ripped out this giant piece of land, it began to fill up with water and became the largest lake in Ireland, known today as Lough. And the displaced earth that he flung into the sea became what we call now the Isle of Man.